Thank you so much. We're so blessed. In 1915 in southern Kansas, there was a little 7-year-old boy who was injured in a schoolhouse explosion. In fact, the explosion was so severe that his older brother actually died in the accident. The little boy's name was Glenn, and he had severe burns on his legs, and both of his feet were damaged, and with the arches were damaged, and it was so severe that even one of his feet, it looked like his left foot, the little toes may have been sort of burned off. You know what, at that time, it sounds very awful, such an awful thing to happen. The doctors told him that he would never walk again. And yet he was 7 years old, and he didn't believe that. And slowly but surely, he began his own healing process. First healing in his home in his farmhouse in Kansas, and then literally crawling out the front door, deciding that it was time to get outside. He noticed there was a fence around the perimeter of his property. He brought himself to the fence, and day after day he would practice holding onto the fence, walking. Very soon after that, he was walking with crutches, and he went almost right from walking with crutches to running because it was too painful to walk. So he was running everywhere. By the time he was in his teens, he actually snuck away from home from his parents so that he could join in a running race with some other high schoolers that were older than him. And he won that race. Isn't that amazing? Do you know who the person is I'm talking about? His name is Glenn, and he became actually a local hero in Kansas. Anybody know his last name? Cunningham. Glenn Cunningham. So here's a picture. And guess what? He has a Kansas University track shirt on. Listen to what he did. He won 3 Big 6 indoor mile titles at KU. He participated in both the 1932 and 36 Olympics. He set an indoor track mile record of 4.04 seconds in 1938. And he earned the nicknames of Kansas Flyer and Iron Horse of Kansas. Now, I mentioned Glenn today because he sure did find a way to show up in the world, no matter what challenges he was facing. I'll talk a little bit more about Glenn later in the service and some of the achievements that he accomplished later in his life. But I just want to let you know that I'm continuing my series today on the human condition. In fact, I'm concluding it. We've done quite a bit of work over the last couple months. I've been talking about growing up and cleaning up and waking up. Those are all areas that we work on with ourselves. It's inner work, which sometimes can be somewhat grueling. It's work with ourselves and also work with people that are the closest with us. But today I'm switching up, and if you'll notice on my slide, all of this is required so that we can show up in our own lives and we can show up in the world. Philosophers Ken Wilber and Terry Patton compare the journey of life actually to a card game. They say the human condition it's a deep game, not about being dealt a better hand, but about playing the cards you're dealt with as much intelligence and care and creativity as we possibly can. Yeah, quite simply, folks, we're not all here to live the same lives. We're all infinitely unique. So it's up to figure out what that unique, the divine that's within us, and bring it forward into the world. Now, over this series, I've talked a lot about this false self, true self, and all this inner work that we're doing so that we can cultivate the true self and bring it forward. That's the part of you that I want you to bring forward into the world, your divine, your divinity, the divine. So while prayer and meditation practices seem to be the best way to make that connection and cultivate that in your life, the philosophy of integral life practice, which is something that Wilber and Terry Patton also teach, they show us that there are many modules and sort of tiny steps along the way that we can use to develop ourselves. And I don't want to go too deeply into this, but I do want you to know that this is a resource for you. I actually pulled up a slide that I found online that shows a little bit about integral life practice. There's modules at the top and practices down beside. There's a handout on the counter if you want to take one home with you and read it through. Just want you to notice the main 4 modules are body, mind, spirit, and shadow. And it's really that spirit and shadow areas that we work on first to help us cultivate and bring forward that true self. It's also important for me to share with you that these little practices don't have to take forever. You know, they can be a few minutes a day in a certain area. It's just about bringing awareness to what the area is in your life, and it can help shift you in a significant way. I'll mention there's other practices here on the overhead, like ethics and work, emotions, nature, relationships. I wanted to touch just a little bit on one of them to give you an example of what I'm talking about. So I started with ethics. And basically, when we put our attention on a subject, we're focusing on, what's the negative in that might be going on in our lives that's distracting us from keeping us on our path. So if you think of any time in your life that you might have done something that's maybe a little bit unethical, you may realize within yourself that it made you unhappy. There might have even been a bit of denial around it in the beginning. It might start a cycle of lies and maybe even a level of self-contempt. But you know what? If you can look at it and acknowledge it, you can shift that energy away to something much, much greater. Practicing ethical behavior is really about one being called continuously to a higher place. And I like this example. It comes from the Buddhist tradition. The Buddhists call this big mind. Big mind is about awareness, and big heart is around care. So if we can be ethical, we're cultivating these practices in our life. And I believe that awareness and care are key components to compassion, which I believe is the quality that all of us need to aspire to in every moment of our lives, to show up in the world the way that we want to be. Now, Wilbur says that every single little practice that we do has the ability to have us show up in the world. In a 2018 May Facebook post, he said this about showing up. He said, where the fruits of our labor truly begin to ripen, where all of our accumulated knowledge, personal growth, spiritual practice, and shadow work become a limitless source of strength, presence, and wisdom, allowing us to engage the many dimensions and challenges of the world in a far more meaningful and impactful way. I mentioned Terry Patton earlier. He does a lot of work with Ken Wilber. He recently published a book called The New Republic of the Heart. And he says that our hope for a better future lies in evolutionary leaders. These are people that have an ability to show up with 4 qualities that he's emphasizing. And these qualities are this: authenticity, integrity, full responsibility, and a commitment to something bigger than oneself. So you might check in with yourself when you hear about that. I like the idea that no matter where each of us are in our own developmental growth, all this work that we're doing that I've been talking about, at any moment in time, you can still choose to act from this place, right here and right now. It doesn't take any bit of work at all. Just make a decision to do that. I would also suggest that if you have these qualities, you are a leader. You are a leader in this church. You are a leader in Lawrence, your home community. You are a leader, a global leader, because the world needs you right now in a very, very big way. Now, during this series, I've talked a lot about developmental lines, and I want to share one of those lines as we talk about showing up in the world, and this is about values. This is actually something that's called spiral dynamics. You may have heard a reference to that here and there. This is a developmental line where Claire Graves, who was the researcher, asked the question, what is important to me? And this is important because, well, basically, whatever your values are is how you're showing up and what groups you're associating with within your community. Most people have some similar interests here in this church, so we have similar values. Now, I wanted to share spiral dynamics in a really short way, so I actually did some research and found some stuff on YouTube from a millennial who found a way to share this in a very short way. His name is Brian Johnson. So I want to describe some of the stages. There are 4 stages that we go through in values, and see if any of this rings a bell. See if you maybe know people in your life that might predominantly be living in one of these stages. And they're color-coded so that we can more easily understand what they're about. So the first one is red, and think terrible twos. So the idea is I'll blow you up if you fill in the blank, me off. Yikes. And so if somebody gets really angry, there's some kind of retaliation associated with it, some kind of conflict. Yes? Did you have a question?
Yes. If I get angry, then sometimes I throw stuff because I have ADHD.
Oh, I hear that, honey. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, and you know what? It's awesome that you're aware of that. That's a lot of maturity to know that at your age. Do you know that? Thank you. So the next step is blue. So we want to think, the Ten Commandments, fundamentalists, anything. Rules are paramount to this stage. Literal interpretations of the Bible are absolutely correct. You might also think in our community about the police force, the military, and even scouting. My husband and youngest son have been at scout camp for the last 2 weeks. They're actively involved in that. There's lots of uniforms and patriotism. And again, you get an idea of what that structure looks like. And then the next one is corporate America, orange, Wall Street, academia, science, and ambition and success are a critical part of this. I even think in our culture, a lot of times when people move from blue to orange just by maybe going into higher education and college. And then finally, although there's more, I'm only sharing 4 today, this is green, it's environmentalism, pluralism, all is one, and very much an attitude of nonviolence. So as I combine all these together, this is an example of spiral dynamics, and notice the levels. There's some lower than the red, which is where I started, and there's a couple higher than the green. But the thing that's significant to me about this is that all the people that are at the level green and below, they all think that whatever level they're in is the right answer. They are 100% right, and quite possibly everybody else is wrong. So if you know anybody, if you might be able to pick which stage you're at, a lot of people in Unity are in green. Okay, I'll let you know that. You might think that all those other people, those different stages, they're wrong. Well, so we all need to grow and evolve, and hopefully we can get to the second tier, which is moving up. Whoops, hit that. Moving up to the yellow that's the next stage above. And what's significant about that, I'll get to that in a minute. I want to share that the thing that's not so funny about this is that if we think that we're 100% right, it's sort of like the whole world turns into a big food fight in a grade school cafeteria. Everybody's so focused. We see this in social media today. I'm right, you're wrong. This is how it is. Well, people just have different perspectives. So let's hear what some of these perspectives are from the different levels. This is kind of the funny from Ryan. He says if you're green, and you may be thinking this but not saying it out loud, so green to orange will say something like, you greedy capitalists, you good for nothing and totally destroying our planet, and my non-violent self really dislikes you. Okay? Okay, have any of you ever said something like that? Okay? Okay, so if you're orange, you might say orange to green, might be saying, you tree-hugging new age hippies, get a job and contribute to the economy, will you? And quit gazing at those crystals. Again, a different perspective. If you're in the blue section to anyone, you're all going to hell because you don't believe in the one true path of God and salvation. Notice you can insert your favorite God here. At that particular level, it doesn't matter. Okay? And then the next one is red, and they look at everyone and say, you don't agree with me? Fine, I'm going to blow you up. Which I'm kind of making some fun out of this, but that's actually quite serious. We've seen that happen in our culture and society with people hurting others just because of that attitude. So there's this either-or thinking that takes place when we're at those levels. And I'm hoping that people will be able to appreciate what I call multiple perspectives, which is that level when you go up to the yellow that I was talking about on the spiral. When you can see the yellow and move to yellow, you can see the multiple perspectives. So this means talking about stages, I'm starting at the bottom with red and moving up to green. I can acknowledge that there is a need to take aggressive action when the situation demands it, okay? I can also see that there are a need for rules and regulations. I can also see that there's a need for a powerful economy, and I can also see that we need that we need to take care of our environment at all times. So again, every single one of those stages is a partial truth, and we need to incorporate them and bring them all together into one. We want to create a space where we can say, instead of either or, we want to say yes and. Yes, and I can hold a different perspective of others, and I can be in a place of non-judgment. And I guarantee if you get to this space, you can actually completely change your life. Those people before that triggered you and created a space of conflict for you, it will go away. It was a light bulb moment for me when I began to understand what was going on with these perspectives. So this is the yes and space, of being able to put on a different pair of glasses and see somebody else's perspective. And thinking about showing up in the world, there's somebody I really appreciate that you may know, Sharif Abdullah. He taught a class here online, I know, maybe almost a couple years ago. And he wrote a book called Creating a World That Works for All. And he talks about 3 different groups in the planet. These are keepers and breakers and menders. And I want to share just briefly about which one of each of these groups are, explain them. The keepers are people that believe the earth is abundant. This does make me think of indigenous cultures. And this is an explanation of who the keeper is. He thinks we live our lives in harmony with all our relations. We act out of the belief that the world was not created for one species. We live here. We don't try to control life. We keep to the ways that work. We live in harmony with what we encounter, and the land is abundant. Just hearing that, doesn't that feel good? It does to me. And then the breakers, there's never enough. We live as though the earth and everything in it was created for mankind. Since I am separate and there's not enough, I must control everything. We do not live in the web of life, but we live on top of it. And a breaker thought creates what Sharif Abdullah calls the mess, which in our society is really anything that is some kind of problem that we're experiencing. It involves violence and pollution, illness, poverty, and inequality. And he's asking each of us to be called higher so that we go to a place where we can be a mender, where we have this belief that abundance needs our help. I'll let you know that if you have, most of us in our culture, I think, are raised in a place where we are breakers, and we have to learn and awaken so that we can become a mender. For the mender, our task is simple and profound: to heal the damage caused by the breakers, those who act as though the earth and all of her inhabitants were their property. We vow to stop breaker destruction and begin to restore the balance between the earth and humanity within this generation. Our goal is to live as consciously integral part of a living, conscious, and sacred planet. I do hope that everybody will listen to that and have an appreciation, an ability to even say, I'm willing to step forward in my life and to be a mender. Sharif says that each one of us can do this individually. He believes in an idea called the power of one, where one person acting alone, out of their own deepest conviction, can change the world. The power to transform our world, the power to transform the power of revolution lies with you, and so does the responsibility. So showing up is an invitation and an activation. Do you hear that? An invitation and an activation. Sharif says we act because we believe we can make things better in our world. He even comes out with this Mender pledge at the end of his book, which I appreciate as well. And he says that he believes in inclusivity. I know that we are one. I want acceptance, no harm, forgiveness, freedom, peace, and love. And you know what? If I can give all those qualities to myself, then I can certainly give those qualities to everyone in my neighborhood and others in the world. I want to go back to my friend Glenn Cunningham that I learned so much about earlier this week. He really was quite remarkable. This is a picture of him in his later life with his wife on a ranch in Kansas. And he truly did love to run. But what I didn't mention is he also really loved children. He and his wife had 12 children of their own. And wait a minute, and listen to this. And he took in an estimated 9,000 troubled or homeless children over a 29-year period at his youth ranch here in Kansas. At one time, they had over about 88 kids at their ranch, and some of them, would stay for a couple weeks at a time, but others would stay for up to 7 or 8 years. Think of the number of children that he influenced in his life. Here's what Glenn Cunningham said about showing up in his own life. He said, if you don't stand for something, you will fall for anything. Belief influences action, and action influences belief. Act as if it were impossible to fail. And every great accomplishment started with a thought. Now, I'm convinced that Glenn would have been a great Unity Truth student. I do know that he was Christian and practicing. While I appreciate the big ways that he's shown up in the world, I found a short foreign film that I want to share with you today. As much as I like this conversation around personal development and all the work that we can do to cultivate and grow ourselves, I do think that sometimes showing up is just about being present in the moment. So to me, that might look like not much effort at all. It's just really about love, and it's about compassion. So this video is about 3 minutes and have some subtitles on it, foreign language, doesn't matter. The pictures tell the story. Can you turn it up, please? So look what just one person can do just by being present to the people around them. So for each of you, I want to thank you for being willing to show up in your own life, and thank you for your continued support in this community. You know, almost every day I get some kind of comment from people here in Unity Lawrence talking about how wonderful this community is. You know, and I'm aware that it's definitely just not about me, it's about the consciousness of the people in this community. I also want to acknowledge, you know, despite the challenges that are going on in our community right now, there's some really good things going on here that I want you to know about. We have 9 new members, which I've heard has not been that so in the past, that number. I've had some really good turnouts with book studies of 9 people in several book studies. At a church this size, that's a good number of people, you all. We had 16 people show up to the centering prayer class that I offered a couple of weeks ago. So there's participation going on here. There are people that are involved, and there are people that are engaged. So I just want to hear that. I want you to hear that and know that we can continue to show up. No matter what the circumstance looks like of this community, we can continue to show up, each of us, and engage with each other. So again, thanks to each of you for showing up for each other. And I would like to conclude this series with this statement that I heard from American dancer and choreographer Martha Graham. She says, "There is a vitality, a life force, an energy, a quickening that is translated through you into action. And because there is only one you in all of time, this expression is unique. And if you block it, it will never exist through any other medium. and it will be lost. The world will not have it. It is not your business to determine how good it is, or how valuable, or how it compares with other expressions. It is your business to keep it yours clearly and directly, and to keep the channel open. God bless.